So, although we did start yesterday, we started the Reb Moshe. We're going to focus for the next year or two on the approach of Reb Moshe Feinstein in Igros Moshe. Okay, let's quickly review the very last thing that we did yesterday, which was we started the Igros Moshe, Even Ezer, Chelek Aleph, Siman Hey. Okay, you guys got it?
Hey, yeah.
Yes, Siman Hey. So, this tshuva is written in Tovshin Chaf Aleph, 1961, and he writes as follows. The case, let's remind ourselves of the case. The case was a woman who was previously married, quote unquote, to a Jewish woman was married, quote unquote, to a Gentile, had a civil marriage with a Gentile. Then she presumably got some sort of civil divorce, then has been living with a Kohen for a number of years, and now wants a Rav to be Masada Chuppah V'Kiddushin for her. Okay? So, the first point he makes is very important machlekes. Remember we saw the machlekes Rambam and Rosh, whether having had a prior relationship with a Nochri creates a Psula Kohuna, is a Din Zoyna. The Mechaber Paskins, who remembers, he says it here. The Mechaber Paskins have an Ezer Siman Dalet Sif Yud Tes Posik Shepsula LeKohuna. She's Posel LeKohuna, right? Like the Rosh.
But the kid is
Correct. Yeah. Psula LeKohuna. But the Beis Shmuel Paskins, what? The Beis Shmuel Paskins that if she's already got married, because the Kiddushin would be Tophus, right? Well, we don't force them to. And this, by the way, we're going to revisit this. Remember this, Beis Shmuel. The Beis Shmuel says, "Nisas ein moitzian miyadai." We don't force them to divorce, to separate.
But
and the question is going to be, we're going to see why. Yes.
Still has nafkaminas, right? For example, if they have a kid, then the kid is not a Kohen, or is
the kid. If
it's from a marriage that's not allowed for a Kohen to have, maybe
the kid is a cholol. The kid is a cholol. Yeah. That's not really our topic today, but you're right. The kid is a cholol. Now, so this is where we pick up. We pick up here on this paragraph after the word. The line starts miyodai. 4 lines up. Aval mikivin shlein. This is bedin atayre lebarkois. Given that this relationship between this Gentile woman and the Kohen was not done bedin Torah only barkois. Harayesh lahachshiv koloi nisas. We need to view it as if she wasn't married. Dehoyois and noite shein tzorich get. Reb Moshe is of the opinion, he's inclined. Yois and noite shein tzorich get. De ba'anoshim ka'elu sheinam shemrei Torah. Such people that are not shemrei Torah, umufkarim le'isur nida u'sh'ari surim. They are mufkar. These concepts of isur nida and other isurim don't play a role in their lives. Leka chazaka. We don't have the chazaka. De'ein adam bayil bilas bilasnus. V'gomer abal l'shem kiddushin kimeduba kidasever harivash. Morning. Kidasever harivash. Pasakain Ramah b'Siman Chavav. We saw the Ramah, remember? And the Mechabin Sim Kuf Mem Tes. Therefore, there's no chazaka. Ein adam bayil bilas bilasnus and kiddushin. Va'af sh'ana machmirin. Even though the truth is, it is true. Sh'ana machmirin sh'leila hatira b'lei get. As I've said to you, standard practice in Botei Din is we are machmir l'chumra. We ask from civil marriage. We require a get l'chumra. Mikomokim vaday ein lahachshiv machmaseh kenisas. But certainly, as a result of this, that would not be considered. We wouldn't view it halachically as if she was married. It is true. Sometimes we say shas adchak is called a dieved. And therefore, here, since they have a child, surely surely the fact that they have a child involved, very interesting. Moshe is taking into account the sensitivity. There's a child here. And therefore, forcing the parents to divorce is not going to be good. Therefore, that should be a shas adchak. Shaloi toiv lahaben sheyizgarshu hoyrov. He kind of throws that in. It's not good for kids when their parents are divorced. However, he says that is not sufficient grounds to be matir them to be considered to give them chuppah v'kiddushin. Deha be'etzem kiven shu sveika dedina da'iraisa. Now here he asks a lomdish question. Yeah, one second. We have a Sofik Deiraisa. What's the Sofik Deiraisa? The Sofik Deiraisa is well, let's see which Sofik. We could argue about which Sofik Deiraisa we're talking about. But there's a Sofik Deiraisa about whether she's Mutter Likuhana. Let's say the Machlekes Rambam and Rosh. So we paskin, she shouldn't be go Likuhana, right? So why do we have this in-between situation, he's asking? What do we have? We say she's Osel Lekayan, Nifsal Lekayan, but the Beis Shmuel, remember he brought the Beis Shmuel, says, but if they're married, we won't. Why? If it's an Issa Deiraisa, it's a Sofik Deiraisa. Isha Zaina v'chalala lo yikochu. So we have a Sofik Deiraisa. So we paskin to that she's possible kuna. So why don't we force her to be megarish? Why does the Beis Shmuel say once you've done it already, okay, you can stay married? How does that work? What's the lomdus? Simple question. Classic Reb Moshe. Of course you should be megarisha. V'hamishna lemelech nishabukushi ala Ramban. This is the opinion of the Ramban. The Ramban says in Nisas Toitzi, the Makoyer of the Halacha of the Beis Shmuel is the Ramban. That once they, even though they shouldn't, but if they got married, we don't force them to divorce. So and Mishnah Melech asks this question. The Ramban says, I don't understand, and he bribes Tzorachiyun. V'hamagid Mishnah sheposku shein mitziin the Maishna misofek grusha. Now he sharpens the question. Classic Reb Moshe sharpens the question. What's the halacha if you have Sofik Gerusha? I'll explain what that means. There are a bunch of different ways of explaining this, but there was a Maisa Gerushin, and we have a question on the validity. There is a real halachic Sofik on the validity of the Gerushin. She's a Sofik Gerusha. Sofik Korev, Loi Korev, La. We can talk about what the case is. There was a case where there was a Gerushin performed, and there was a question on its validity. Sofik Gerushin. What's the halacha? Can a Kayan marry a Sofik Gerusha? What do you think? No. Why not? Sofik Deraisa. What would be if he did?
We wouldn't make them split.
But it would be still a love every time he's with them.
What is the halacha? So, of course, they should not get married. I'm talking about Kiddushin, right?
Yeah.
A Rav should not do it, and a Sofik Gerusha. If he did, the Kiddushin are valid, the Kiddushin are chal. Mm-hmm. But would we force them then, once we became aware of this, would we say they've got to divorce? What would we say? What do you think? Let's see.
Say no.
You'd say not. Okay, let's see. Mm-hmm. Says the Reb Moshe. So the Mishnah Melech and the Magid Mishnah, who ask on the the Mishnah Melech asks on the Ramban who paskins ein moitziin my shnami Sofik Grusha. Why should it be different from Sofik Grusha? Sha'af benises teitzei. Sorry guys, the halacha is that if a kohen marries a Sofik Grusha, we force them to divorce. So why should the Beis Shmuel paskin like the Ramban over here that in this case akum ve'eved abal bas Yisrael she's posel likahuna, but in this says loy teitzei. What's the logos?
So then
No, but no, not marriage. It's not about marriage.
I think that
again, let's get the case. Let's just get the case. I just want to explain the question. The case is as follows: the Mechaber paskins that this is what we're discussing. If a Gentile has a relation, an intimate relationship with a Jewish girl,
because here it's not about the
yeah.
Here it's about the children. Right.
Why has it got to do rega? Yeah, I think if I speak out the question, you know what? You say the question. Why am I saying the question? You say the question.
So, why do we ask him in the case of a Sofik Gerusha that she is they should definitely split up?
Yes, they have to do a get.
In the other case, we really don't have a Sofik in that way because we really know that she's not okay with him.
So it's a kal v'chomer, you're saying?
It should be.
And what did you? Very good. What would you say is the answer?
The answer would be you. In the second case, we talked about the Sofik Gerushin in the case of really Kiddush, Kupar Kiddushin.
What difference does it make? There are two separate shemois of Isur for a Kayan, Gerusha and Zoina.
Yeah.
They're both Isurim Deiraisa. Got it?
Yes. So
what do you think?
I think the difference is in the type of a Sofik. So in the Sofik Grusha, we know for sure that if she's a Grusha, she's also Bevada. Yes?
Right.
The only question is she a grusha or not? In the other case, it's a question. It's a halachic question on the definition of the zoina.
Okay. Very
So-
good.
I was
Very good.
going into that.
Yeah. So the definition of the
Okay.
zoina, and that's a complicated.
Let's see whether Rav Moshe. Did you hear what he says? It's a nice. Let's see whether Rav Moshe agrees with you. Let's see. The suspense is killing me. Let's see. V'tzarich leima ketiretz shar hamelech. The Shar HaMelech asks this question. B'seifai. Shekiv and shelahoitze b'kfiyah. Says the Shar HaMelech. The Shar HaMelech says as follows. So what are we going to say? We're going to force him to divorce. Let's assume that we're going to say, right, we've got this case where she's posel l'kohuna, she's got din zayna, because she had a relationship with prior with a guy. So she's got a din zayna, therefore she's posel l'kohuna. So what are we going to say? We should really say kofin, we should force them to divorce. What's the halacha if you force somebody to divorce? Says the Shar HaMelech that you see, if you there's as you said correctly, there's a machlokes rishonim whether she's kosher or not. It's a machlokes Rambam and Rosh. So we pasken like the Rosh that she's a zona, which is why we don't let her marry in the first place. But now when we come to divorce, if the Rosh is right, then this get is no good. If the Rosh is right, then she was kosher to him, which means the Kiddushin was good, and you have now created a forced get Musa, which is posel. Yeah? So what you've done, therefore, is you've created a get Musa. So now I have a situation where if the halacha is like the Rambam, if the Rambam is right, you see, it's one thing to paskin misafek not to do something. Is this woman a zoina or not? The Rambam says no, the Rosh says yes. The Shulchan Aruch says, I am going to paskin, she's a zoina, do not marry her. You didn't listen to Shulchan Aruch, you went ahead. Is she a zoina or not? Machlokes rishonim. According to the Rosh, according to the Rambam, this woman is not a zoina. She is married, valid, it's a valid chuppah v'kiddushin to this kohen. Not only is it valid, there's no issa involved at all. If we are now going to force them to divorce, that is going to be illegitimate. There's no grounds for this kfiyah, which means the get will be get mus and the get will be posel. Right? Let's see how he plays this out. Says the Shar HaMelech, Kivin shelahoitzi b'kfiyah im hi ksheira loy hoyer ze get mu'user sheposel. Lochein, kivin she'ikam and omar diksheira, given that there is a man da'omar, choshev a man da'omar, the Rambam holds she's kosher. So even though we paskin like the Rosh, don't marry in the first place, but if there is the opinion of the Rambam, since she's kosher, ein lanu lohitzia b'kfiyah, me'acha shelididei yeh get posel, you'll end up with a get posel. So what you're ending up with, if you force them, is you're going to end up with a woman who's a sofik grusha and a sofik eishesish to get posel. You're creating a problem by being kaifa. V'loidami l'sofik grusha b'maisa. And this is not the same thing as when you performed an act of gerushin, but there was a technical question on whether it was chal or not, Because everybody, absolutely, very good. Daniel Kolakavot. It's exactly the svara. He just added a bit of a knetch with the which is beautiful, with the get musa bit, according to the Rambam, right? But you've essentially got the answer, Kolakavot. Baruch shekivanto l'divrei Shar HaMelech. V'huva b'pischei tshuva sifkot and gimel shenimtza sherak onu en koven oisel agarsha. Now listen to what Rav Moshe does. He takes this Beis Shmuel and he says it now means that we will not force them to divorce. But we would encourage them to divorce. We would say to him, look, we have a real problem on our hands. According to the Rosh, which the Shulchan Aruch Paskins like, you're living be'issa. You're marrying a zayna. And therefore, of course, we would encourage them to divorce. We're not going to force because of the other suffix. But of course, don't misinterpret it as saying, oh, it's all fine. No, of course we would. And if that is the case, Dr. Moshe, beautiful. Now what are you asking? You want me to do chuppah v'kiddushin? You ought to count your lucky stars that we're not actually forcing you to divorce. And now you want us to perform chuppah v'kiddushin? No, sir. That doesn't add up. The maximum we can do is we can say, because of this suffix, we're not going to force you to divorce. We should create a chuppah v'kiddushin? No way. Under no circumstances. Now, v'imhu v'gam, and then Rav Moshe adds a lamdas. Says Rav Moshe, last paragraph. V'gam, and we should also point out to this guy that you're not actually, what are you thinking now? I don't know, maybe they're getting a bit from or whatever it is, and they've decided after being together for many years that they want a chuppah v'kiddushin. We need to point out to him, actually, you're not even doing yourself any favors, you're not gaining anything. V'gam hu ba'atzmei lo yarviach klum. Why? We saw this already in the Avnei Miluim. See if you remember. Dalah Rambam beloy kiddushin kill mi kiddushin. According to the Rambam, you're better off, quote unquote, relatively speaking, continuing to live with this woman without kiddushin, because the Rambam holds that only when you marry her with a kiddushin do you get malchus for marrying a grusha or a zaina. So if you don't marry her, it might be an osa, it might even be an issa deraisa possibly, but there's certainly no malchus. So according to your lomdus, you want to, I don't know, solemnize this, and then you realize what you're doing according to the Rambam is you're just opening yourself up to malchus. So you want to do the firm route? Not a good idea. All you're doing is creating a situation where you're definitely chayav malchus. Makes no sense. Whereas according to the Rambam, you're only over an issa pnuya, which might even be derabanan. So at the moment what you're doing, it's wrong. It's very, according to the Rambam, it's only an issa derabanan. And if she's miyuchedes to him, that she's like a pilegesh, haril ha'rayvad v'ramban, it's mutter altogether. It might actually be mutter, according to the Rayvad and the Ramban, if she's a pilegesh, without chuppah kiddushin. Have a look in the Beis Shmuel, and even the Rosh and the Tur, it's not so clear. Leka issa borur. We saw this in Chavav, and even according to the Rambam, there's a lav even without kiddushin. You're absolutely gaining nothing. This is a small teshuva, but it is absolute. It's genius at so many levels. We've had an acknowledgement of the sensitivity of the issue. The emotions of the child is acknowledged, but then a cold, sober, halachic analysis with the clear lomdus is just when you finish learning a tshuva like this of Rav Moshe, it's just like it's so clear, it's so obvious, it's so the Torah is so it's so emes, and he's got this hekav. He would paskin very often because he was such a gorn in Gemara and the Rishonim. Some people know Mishnah Brura, a bit of Bir Halacha or something. And he did it the other way around. It was the old style where he knew that all the Tosfos and all the Rishonim and then how they traced their way down. And that was just, to me, that's a beautiful little tshuva. Okay, next, let's move on to the next one, which is on the next page. There's an arrow there, Siman Ayin Dalet. It's in Even Ezra Chelik Aleph Siman Ayin Dalet. Okay, and this is quite a long one, but I'm going to skip through bits. I've highlighted the bits that in preparing it, I've highlighted the bits that I want to do in it. Okay, Siman Ayin Dalet. Be'isha shedora im echad b'lei chuppah v'kiddushin. Now this was actually slightly earlier. This is in 1959. A woman who is living with somebody. Here's the title, the koteret. A woman is living with somebody b'lei chuppah v'kiddushin. Rak b'reshima etzel pekid hamemshala. Now this is really interesting. This is historic also, and it introduces some really interesting elements. So a couple that were living without chuppah kiddushin, they were registered with the memshala. Shekenu minag ha'uma b'medina hahu. That was the minag of what was done in that nation. We'll see where this is in a minute. He writes this to Reben Zion Goldzweig. No idea where he is. Okay, now let's get into the story. Bidvar ha'isha shabbat me'Ungaran. She came from Hungary. Shetachas memsheles haSovieten. So they were at the time, 1959, communist rule in Hungary. And she says, Shedoro im ish meshach zman. She's been living with somebody for quite a while without Kiddushin Torah. Rak b'mashen nidrshamu b'pinkas pakida memshala be'ir. But they were registered, anmeldung, as one does here. You come into a town, you have to anmeldung. I found that hilarious when I came here. I want to go and live in
England?
Of course not. It's called democracy, mate. You live wherever you like. You want to pay, yes, if you're renting somewhere, then you...
How do you vote in England?
There's a voting register. It's a separate thing, Beseda, but...
Okay, well, that's the same.
Yeah, I know, but I still found it quite weird, this anmeldung thing. But it doesn't matter. Get a residence permit. I don't need a permit to go live in Birmingham or Cardiff or Liverpool. Never mind. Doesn't matter. Never mind. But this is I think it is to some extent a bit of a throwback. Let's have a paper trail, which we can then lose. Okay, so she lived. So what they did was they were nirsham bepinkas pakida memshala bahoir shekein hu shom or shem hoishus mem memshala sheilem shum kinyan. No kinyan was done. V'lo shum maisa. There was no ceremony. It's angemeldet, ja. Rakushiba itzel pakid. V'achazman hiskimu lehi parade. V'holchu la pakid v'rosham shem ufurodim. Getrennt, whatever. We are now separated, so we now go and we'll register we update our status, not online, but with the Pakid HaMemshala, went to the town hall, and we now registered we are separated.
So basically did the separation act for Goyim, so to speak.
Yeah, the same way. There was no ceremony either way. It was purely civil, but angemeldet. Right. V'yoyse lo yodu, they didn't know anymore, lo hu v'lo hi, shelo yodu mishum rav Yehudi, Umunuhagin b'dinei Yisrael. They had no connection or knowledge of a Rav, of the dinei minhagim of Klal Yisrael. The nohagu, and their whole issues behiskarvusam ubehipardam keminhagei hamemshala. They did whatever they were told to do. Shechoshvu shekein tzarich lehisnaheg chukei hamemshala. In their mind, this is what you do. You go and you register, and that's it. Ume'oz shenifradu, and from the moment that they separated, Holachabal, the husband's gone. Ve'eno yodas heichen hu, we have no idea where he is. Ve'hi ba'al Canada, and she moved from Hungary to Canada. And the question is, she now wants to marry somebody here. Im yesh lahatira lehinose, ve'hi adayin ishot seira, she's still young, she wants to remarry. Ve'hi ulevad etzem o igun, besides for the concept of aguna. Shechazal choshu letakona, where Chazal were always very careful and sensitive to alleviate the plight and the suffering of a grass widow. But weighed up against that is also, we don't want her just to be hefka, to be with anybody. So the Rav who asked the Shaila is inclined to be Mekel. Now, says Rav Moshe, if what she said is true. Really interesting. If what she said is true, we'll come back to this. Then then no kiddushin was done. Even if in the town hall at the moment they were angemeldet, there happened to be two Jews ksherim standing around there, das is gar nix. That would have no significance. But if they lived in the Cholent Bowl, they lived in the ghetto, they lived in the place where there were lots of Yehudim Kesherim, and they lived together as family, man and wife, let's call them Goldberg, whatever, right? So everybody knew that, whatever, Chaim and Sarah, Goldberg, they are living together as man and wife. And amongst, in a society, in the Seviva of Yidno Ksherim La'edus, Sheneimah, so now we're going to say, Chazaka ein adam mesi bilasa bilasanus. Right? Maybe. On that he says, Pligabal Kadmoi. On that concept, we have a fundamental machlokes Rishonim, the Rashba versus the Rivosh. As we know, the Rashba says, we saw this already, yes? I'm going to skip through it. So let's see how he is, because I want to save some time. The Harei Sover, skip down to the about 5 or 6 lines, middle of the line. Harei Sover, Harei Sover, the Afa Muvkal Aver is a Soita Laboila Min Chazak Shalivo. The Rashba is of the opinion that even if somebody's doing a separate another Aveira, but we will say Chazaka. The Radvaz also says Babayel Nida, who's not worried about Issachar, we're not Choshen Shem Shem Kiddushin, Dali Shaykhan is Binas Bilasnus. And the Mishnah Melech agrees. So we have fundamentally a machlokes between the Rivosh and the Rashba, whether when somebody is living not as they should do, either because of Isanida, or because they didn't do Chop of Kiddushin, or they went to the cathedral to get married. So the Rivosh says nothing doing, and he goes down. We know this, and he goes down to the end of that paragraph, and he says. V'harama v'hamachaber posku karadvaz v'rivosh, and it's mashma the Gorn is also agreeing. The imkain, last words, important words, end of that paragraph. The imkain nifsak deloy karashba. So therefore, the halacha is not like the Rashba, in other words, like the Rivosh, that a couple who are not married, b'chuppah v'kiddushin, and they're doing all sorts of other aveiros, we are not really concerned. We do not apply the chazaka in Adonai Sibilas Vidasnus. Okay. The imkain, therefore, next paragraph, the imkain ba'uvda zu shebarur shlei tavla l'indusa, where we are certain she didn't go to mikveh, because if she went to table in the mikveh, im haya sham, if there was one there, then somebody would know. It would be written down. The Balanit would know. The Rebbetzin would know. The Rav would know. Somebody would know. And they would have probably got involved and suggested to them have a Mesadrim Kiddushin V'Nisuim. He says because in the 1950s in Hungary, there were still some Elachim there. They said, according to what she says, we didn't know of a Rav or of religious Jews, Anoshim Ksherim, so she definitely didn't go to the table of the mikveh. Now we're back to the Rivosh, no Chazaka, so nothing, yeah? Now, it's true, they're not bad people. Maybe there wasn't a mikveh there, but doesn't matter, says Ramesh. In the case of the Rivosh also, they were Anusim. They're not bad people, but they were Anusim, and they had circumstances in Mallorca just pre the Inquisition were bad. These are not bad people, but doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, they weren't Choshesh for Isanida. That they nevertheless, so no Chazak. We can leave out the next paragraph. It's not relevant. Now, then he starts with some other lomdas. V'hasofik shalachelkes mechaykik. Afsha anusim heim rak l'teyovin. Now, here we have he brings in a Gemara, which I think I mentioned to you, which we should quickly review in case I didn't. Remember the Gemara in Chulin l'shavak heteira v'achal isura? Did I mention it? If I didn't, I'm mentioning it now. There's a Gemara, and he'll give us the context. First, let me translate. The Gemara Paskins in Chulin, it's a case about Chometz Sha'aval Av Pesach, which we'll come to. There is a statement, a begrif, which you should know, a halachic principle. Loi shovek inish hetera va'ovad isura. I remember I did mention it to you, because I remember saying the example. Imagine you have two burgers in front of you. One of them is McDonald's, and one of them is glad kosher. The average person, certainly a person with a cheskes kashrus, all else being equal, will not leave the one which is glad kosher and go and eat dafka the McDonald's one. Loi shovek hetera. You won't leave the thing which is mutter and go and do an issa. That's a Gemara in Chulin. Question: is the chazaka in Adam Eisa Bilasa Bila Zanus predicated on that principle or not? And this is what we're going to have a look at. Okay, you with me? Let's see. The Chelkes Mechaykik has a suffix here, which we're not going to go into. It doesn't matter, but I want to introduce the lomdas. It's very important. These anusim are l'teyovain. They're not dafka going against Hashem. They were in pre-Inquisition in Mallorca. They were not living an easy life. Things were not easy for them. They didn't have a lot of choices. Those choices were taken away from them. I have the chometz of somebody that is an over avera. Somebody even that's prepared to eat chometz on Pesach. My question is the chometz she'over lava Pesach, where they have an opportunity to switch it with chometz that wasn't over lava Pesach. So there we say, loy shavak hetera v'ochel isura. If you have a way of doing something okay, at no particular cost to yourself, then we have an assumption. Loy shavak hetera, person won't leave the kosher burger and he won't have chometz davka, chometz she'over lava Pesach if he has an alternative. Tolinon that the chometz of the oivrei avera shehechlifu b'motzei Pesach, that he swapped it. Even though it is true that the Isser of eating Chometz Shabbal of Pesach is only an Isser Rabbanon, which is much lighter, who is a cow, Ma'achila de Pesach Shu B'Koris. V'im Kain, so you see, even so he was over on the Isser of Nidal Teyavon. But so what? But if you have, that's because maybe you had no choice. But if you have another alternative in another area, maybe we would still apply the Lo Shavak Hatera V'Ochel Isura. He's asking on the Rivosh. And like the Rashba, so there was no mikveh. Fine. Maybe there was a mikveh. It was tircha gedayla, but still harayesh litlois. But still, we see from this Gemara that we're not going to be toiler shelo yavor al masha'ef shelo lasos beheta af al isakal dipnuya. You see from the Gemara in Chulin that even a relatively light Aveira, but if a person has an option, even though he may transgress on other much worse Aveiras, but if in one area you have options, we will still assume, despite the fact that you do terrible Aveiras, but in this particular Aveira, you have an option, we will assume you won't do an Issa just for the sake of it. And v'zeh koshal harivosh oidiesa, and this is now a kasha on the rivosh. V'tzorich leima, leave out a line, v'tzorich leima, tari chozina shechazaka zu d'leishava keter v'achal isura, lo yamrinon lahachshiva mekudeshes. The svara of leishava keter v'achal isura, we say by isurim. We're not going to use that svara to create a valid identity or a process of kiddushin. D'hotam zeh hoye shaykh leima af biyodoshu poretz biznus. Umefurish b'ramah, in the name of the Trumas Hadeshen, the Ramah Paskins in the name of the Trumas Hadeshen, and I showed this to you, I don't know if you remember, Behuchzak liznus leke chazok. And we're not chayish, if somebody is muchzak for znus, we're not chayish for kiddushin. V'chein poshetu la avnei miluim. You have shava katera v'achal isura. What's the lomdas? V'atam nira, mishum she'al kolponim le'boru le'inshe chazok zu, af she'semchen al zel ledina gam l'isurin deiraisa. The idea of the Eidim has to be definite. We're going back to what he said remember we saw this? The idea of the Eidim for a good Kiddushin, even if you're going to apply the Chazaka, but the Eidim need to know this. And here he starts playing a very interesting game. Do you know, I don't know, do you know what game theory is?
Yes.
You're familiar with game theory?
Yes.
Okay. Or the prisoner's dilemma, sometimes called. Game theory. You should go away and Google it, because it's really, really interesting. It's basically, I'll give you the very basic one. I don't want to go into it. It's what happens if the police catch. It's called the prisoner's dilemma. You should learn this. If it's useful to know for youth activities and stuff like that. You should do it. The police catch two people stealing. They separate them so one doesn't know what the other one knows, and they offer them a deal. And you have a couple of options. One is to sing like a canary and to say Lashon Hara on the other guy, then you get a lighter sentence. But that depends also on what the other guy is going to say. It's a complicated scenario, and it has to do with how much you will look after yourself or be generous, and it's called the prisoner's dilemma. It's also called game theory. It means it's the psychology of what do I know, what do I think the other person thought? And what do I think that he thought that I thought that he thought? That I thought. You understand? This can go on and on and on. And Reb Moshe, when I learned this from Moshe, I was reminded of this. Mm-hmm. We have a chazaka, even if somebody might be doing terrible other isurim, but there's idea that in an area which is easy, and chazaki won't make bidas nus. Fine. But what do you two, as Eidim, think about me having that? It's not good enough just for me to have the chazaka. There needs to be edus. That means your state of mind is important, and my understanding of your state of mind is also important. Now let's see how he does this. It's awesome. You with me? Says Reb Moshe, "V'yedias edim tzorich shetia yedia mamish be'etzem mitzad re'iyosam." The idea of the edim has to be absolute mitzad what they see, or af b'yediosam, or mitzad what they know. It has to be clear. Ubeporotz liznus, if you two, see somebody who is porotz liznus, right? So would it be clear to you that he has kavanah for kiddushin? Probably not. V'afim ha'edim talmidei chachomim. Then he plays the game. Even if the edim are talmidei chachomim, sheyitlu mitzad yediosam es hadin. So you know, chazokei not amazing bilas minas nus. These are nusim. These people there don't have a clue. This secular couple in Hungary in the 1950s, they don't know anything. But you two are talmidei chachomim. So you know, there's a gemara mitasvara chazokei not amazing bilas nus. Okay, fine. And you know, you also know the gemara in Chulin. That he won't be, if a person had an option, he won't be Shavak HaTorah to be Boyal L'Shem Kiddushin, and therefore V'yachri Etzel HaMadin Lo Meken Gam Ke Mitzad Svaras Atzmo. But the Avalo Rosha HaPoretz Liznus Lo Yodu Mizeh Sheyitlo L'Kiddushin. He doesn't know that you are going to think, because he's an Amoretz, so he doesn't know there is even a Gemara to know that you're going to know. He doesn't even know it exists. So he has no way of knowing that you're going to think that it's Kiddushin. And therefore, I think definitely they think, these religious Jews looking on me, they're probably going to think I'm a bad guy because I've got beards and I don't daven. So they probably think that I'm doing... So you see the circle. The suspicion of me as a secular Jew towards you two guys with long beards in Hungary in the 1950s is, you probably look at me as if I'm less of a Jew than you, man. Right? Every Israeli taxi driver's battle cry. Yeah? You know what I mean? So you and the self perception is increased. So you think that I'm doing znus. I think that you think that I'm doing znus. So we're back to square one. I need to know that you are aiding for my kiddushin. Even if I were to know such a thing. Bekitza, you see what Rabbi done? This genius. Forget it. So therefore he says, even if there is a concept of Lishavik Ketera V'Achanisura, I need to know there is such a thing as Heter and Issa. You need to know that I know. You need to be made, be Yediyah on what is going on in my mind. And because we are so different, it's never going to happen. And that is his next point. And V'lachein Borum, look at the bottom line here. V'lachein Borum mitzad zeh lahorivosh, she'af ba'anusim, kivin she'ovrim al harbe dvarim. V'rabim hem nispartzim mitzad hargelam achagzeira to do many isurim, gam liznosim nochrios, pnuya bas Yisrael nasalahem keheta. There's no anan sahadi to say that we are sure that he was Baal Hashem Kiddushin. There's no anan sahadi. Finished. And that's the end. That's all we need from that paragraph. There's no Anan Sadi. I'm going to run a bit further. And then he says something quickly. We'll do it quickly, a few more minutes, yeah? Because I want to make some progress. If you get time to go through any of this yourself, it would be awesome. Go to almost the end of the... The imkain ba'uvdazu. The imkain is at the end of the line. It's here. The imkain. Look. You got it? The imkain. The imkain. Therefore, ba'uvdazu in this case. Even if you want to say that all they were trying to do was, they were scared. It's Soviet, it's communist Hungary in the 50s. They don't want to step out of line. They don't want to disappear. So they just want to be good children and do They obviously the Soviets did not look favorably on people who were religious, religious Jews. Or maybe they were scared they'd lose their job, their tenure in the university, or who knows what. We have no anansadi that they kept whatever mitzvahs they could. We have no way of knowing that. Therefore, ein lochos l'kiddushin. V'kol shekei sheyodua adarabba. Elu she'ein roitzin leida mirav Yehudim anoshim kshem sheba'ir she'adayin. There were rabbonim around then. There were religious Jews. It wasn't a secret that we knew they were there, and they, for whatever reason, but they chose. I'm not blaming them, but they chose not to have a chuppah v'kiddushin. You know how many Yidden got married in chuppah v'kiddushin in the Soviet? Loads, yeshivas. They had it underground. Those that wanted had access to it, and therefore. Because even if there were some that were scared, they wouldn't want to know what they were doing. But if they had any, it's not about blaming them, and you mustn't misread Moshe. It's not about blame or judgment. It's trying to assess the reality, what was going on in their minds. For whatever reason, and we're not judging them, and we're not being, maybe they were scared, but they chose to have, they had an option. There was an option. It wasn't a good option for them, but there was access to chuppah v'kiddushin, there was access to the word from Yidden around, there was Rabbonim, they chose not to, therefore we are anan sadi that for whatever reason, Torah and mitzvahs was not a value in their eyes. And finally, just for today, just because I want to introduce, we mentioned Rav Henkin, here is where he introduces Rav Henkin. Remember I mentioned him to you? How many opinions do we have that say civil marriage is good? Excellent, absolutely, very good. So here's the first time we're going to see Rav Henkin. Yedidi hagoyin Rav Yosef Eliyahu Henkin Shlita b'sifrei Pirish Ivra he'erich levaer sheleka din b'kiddushin sheyiskavnu lekiddushay mitzvahs Torah. Rav Henkin was machadash that in kiddushin you don't need to have kavana for the kiddushin of the mitzvahs Torah. Elo bezeh she'isha zu lokach shetia lo le'isha hu hakavana lekinyan ishus shetzarich. As long as a man, without chuppah v'kiddushin, but he does something and he takes and is miyached a woman for himself for the purposes of living together as man and wife. That's enough. Therefore, even in Hungary there was no kinyan. You stop them and ask them, well, guys, what are you doing? We're getting married. Says Rav Henkin, that's enough, insofar as to say that any bia that is done afterwards is a bia of kinyan, and therefore there's no difference whether she's osa, she's mutter, kosher, porutz, b'chiyai gavna, sheyodinan shel isha zu lokach leishus. Even if it's less than a shava pruta, I think that is the Rav Henkin, and that's where we're going to stop for today. Okay.